Welcome to the Secrets of the Bible channel. There are people, and there are certain people. Some people can change the flow of your life for good when you meet them. This is what happened to David when he met the special woman, Abigail. This story happened after David lost his mentor, Samuel. 1 Samuel 25 verse 1 Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. And they buried him at his house in Ramah. Then David left and went down to the wilderness of Paran. 1 Samuel 25 verses 2-3, Amplified Bible. Now there was a man in Mon, whose business and possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was intelligent and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings. He was a Calebite. There are 4 distinct types of riches. Riches can be found in what you own, what you do, what you know, and most importantly, in who you are and what you stand for. These are the riches of character. Nabal was tremendously rich, but his wealth was only measured by the things he owned, and he had the lowest kind of riches. This was the harvest time for a sheep rancher. Because it was a season of ingathering, sheep shearing was a time of lavish hospitality towards others. The shearing of sheep was historically commemorated with a feast, and there was more than enough food for everyone. The name of the man was Nabal. This indicates his low character, because the name Nabal means fool. In ancient Israel, names were often connected with a person's character. We don't know if Nabal was given this name or earned it, but he certainly lived up to it. In contrast to her husband Abigail, Nabal's spouse possessed both stunning good looks and profound insight. The Bible gives Abigail great praise when it says she is beautiful, because the only women with this Hebrew phrase applied to them are Rachel and Esther. How could a man like Nabal have ever gotten with a woman like this? 1 Samuel 25 verses 4-9, Amplified Bible. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, Go up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And this is what you shall say, Have a long life. Peace be to you, and peace to your house, and peace to all that you have. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not harmed them, nor were they missing anything all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your sight, and be well treated, for we have come on a good festive day. Please, give whatever you find at hand to your servants, and to your son David. When David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in the name of David. Then they waited. Please give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and to your son David. David made this proposal because he performed a helpful service for Nabal, guarding his flocks when Philistine raids were common. To our modern ears, it might sound like David ran some protection racket. But that wasn't the case. He performed an excellent, helpful service for Nabal. We read, Nabal was shearing his sheep. This indicates that David waited until the appropriate time to request payment for the services he provided. David protected Nabal's shepherds and flocks for a long time, but did not expect compensation until Nabal himself made his money at the harvest of sheep shearing. We read, David sent 10 young men. This demonstrates that David made the request courteously. He accomplished it through messengers so Nabal would not be scared off by the news. He dispatched his emissaries with the greeting, Peace be to you, which was full of love and generosity, so that Nabal would not give out of fear or intimidation. We then read, Your shepherds were with us, nor was there anything missing. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. This demonstrates that David requested appropriately, taking his time and showing patience while providing Nabal with an itemized receipt for the services offered. David reminded Nabal in an offer that was respectful of the customs of giving that surrounded the harvest and the shearing of sheep. We then read, Please give whatever comes to your hand. David did not insist that Nabal make a particular contribution to him, nor did he establish a price. Instead, he simply left it up to the charity of Nabal. The messengers of David awaited the response at this point. 1 Samuel 25 verses 10-12. Amplified Bible. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today, each of whom is breaking away from his master. So should I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers, and give it to men when I do not know where they are from?" So David's young men made their way back and returned, and they came and told him everything that was said to them by Nabal. There was no way that Nabal could have been unaware of who David was, given that David was well known across the entirety of Israel. This was intended as a direct insult to David by Nabal, who was aware of David's identity, but chose not to acknowledge him. Nabal questioned using language more common in today's society. Who does he think he is? We then read, "There are many servants nowadays who break away, each one from his master." Nabal continued to belittle David by claiming that he was a disobedient servant. This was a complete fabrication, because David had always, albeit not always flawlessly, prudently defended himself whenever Saul had assaulted him. Nabal demonstrated what a stingy and uncaring man he was. Instead of seeing everything as belonging to the Lord, he saw it all as his own. Generosity does not begin with the thought, "This is mine and I will share it with you." It believes, "Since all I own belongs to the Lord, you are entitled to a portion of it as well." 1 Samuel 25 verse 13 Amplified Bible. David said to his men, "Each man put on your sword." So each man put on his sword. David also put on his sword. And about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed back with provisions and supplies. Then David said to his men, "Every man gird on his sword." David received Nabal's response exactly the way Nabal intended it to be accepted, as a great insult. David was a strong fighter and warrior, which makes it clear that Nabal is not dealing with a coward or a nobody. David would have told his warriors, "Lock and load," if he had been speaking in our contemporary manner. David was prepared for the fight. This is not a high moment for David, and he doesn't respond the way the Lord would have him respond to an insult, or even an attack. God would have us bear insults with love and kindness, returning their evil with our good. This is high ground to walk on. David did not treat Nabal with the same thoughtfulness and patience as Saul. David was able to show kindness and patience with Saul, but it appears more difficult for him to do so for someone he regarded as being on the same level as himself, or as being below him. Approximately 400 men accompanied David. David is not coming to Nabal to make a statement, but to wipe him out. Because of this, he and his men armed themselves, leaving some of his men behind to guard the things they left behind and serve as reinforcements. 1 Samuel 25, verses 14 to 17, Amplified Bible. But one of Nabal's young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Listen. David sent messengers out to the wilderness to greet our master, and he shouted at them in contempt. But David's men were very good to us, and we were not harmed or treated badly, nor did we miss anything as long as we were with them when we were in the fields. They were a wall of protection to us both night and day, all the time that we were with them tending the sheep. Now then, know this and consider what you should do, for evil is already planned against our master and against all of his household. But he is such a worthless and wicked man that one cannot speak reasonably to him." He reviled them. One of the servants who saw Nabal's response to David's men tells Nabal's wife Abigail that Nabal reviled David's men, and by extension David. To revile means to treat with contemptuous language. The handwriting was clearly on the wall for Nabal's employees to read. They were confident that David would not put up with such an insult without putting up a fight. They requested that Abigail carry out some action, not only for themselves but also for the sake of the home. He is such a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him. This clarifies why they did not petition instantly to Nabal. The book of Proverbs had not yet been written, and they still knew the truth of Proverbs 17 verse 12. Let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fall in his folly. Thus they made this life or death appeal to Abigail. 1 Samuel 25 verses 18 to 20. Amplified Bible. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 jugs of wine, 5 sheep already prepared for roasting, 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. She said to her young men, "Servants, go on ahead of me. Behold, I am coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. It happened that as she was riding on her donkey and coming down by way of the hidden part of the mountain, that suddenly David and his men were coming down toward her, and she met them. We read, Abigail moved fast. This was a wise and discerning lady, aware that time was of the matter, and that something needed to be done as quickly as possible. She therefore made the necessary preparations. Abigail carried out the actions that Nabal ought to have carried out, but did not carry out. The fact that Abigail could harvest such a large quantity of food in such a short amount of time demonstrates how wealthy Nabal was. If there was already so much food available, then Nabal's unkind response to David is even more disappointing. 1 Samuel 25, verses 21 to 22. Now David had said, "Surely in vain I have protected and guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missing of all that belonged to him, and he has repaid me evil for good. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave alive even one male of anyone belonging to him." David said, "And he has repaid me evil for good." David was valid, but not right in his heart. He had the facts straight, but not his heart. "If I leave one male of all belonged to him by morning light." This made David's choice clear. He planned to execute Nabal and all the males of his household. This was the typical response. Nabal's own servants expected it. 1 Samuel 25, verses 23 to 31. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from the donkey, and kneeled face downward before David, and bowed down to the ground in respect. Kneeling at his feet, she said, "My lord, let the blame and guilt be on me alone, and please let your maidservant speak to you, and listen to the words of your maidservant. Please do not let my lord pay attention to this worthless man Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal, fool, is his name, and foolishness, stupidity, is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see my lord's young men whom you sent. So now, my lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has prevented you from shedding blood, and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be as self-destructive as Nabal. Now this gift which your maidservant has brought, my lord, let it be given to the young men who accompany and follow my lord. Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord a secure and enduring house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil will not be found in you all your days. Amen. Both by having shed blood without cause and by my lord having avenged himself. When the Lord deals well with my lord, then remember, with favor, your maidservant." Abigail was able to stay hidden from David until the very moment that they came face to face, because the landscape was mountainous, and she was able to descend the hill while remaining hidden. It would appear that Abigail was the one who first spotted David. And when David saw her for the first time, she bowed before him, while leading a vast train of presents and sustenance. David was in an anxious and irritated mood, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a large procession of gifts came toward him, and a lovely woman bowed down before him at the head of that procession. This caused David and his entire company to come to an immediate stop. David was bound to have a startled reaction to this. She dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground. Abigail presented her case in the most subdued manner possible. She did not come to David as a superior. Instead, she came to David in the position of his lowly servant. In this appeal, Abigail did a lot of things really correctly, and that helped her case. As soon as she was made aware of the emergency, she did not waste any time in taking action. Then Abigail made haste. She was aware that this was a time-sensitive scenario, and as a result, she acted quickly. If you said it was for David, it would give the impression that he was only interested in the money, and that David's dignity might be restored with enough of it, which would be an insult. Abigail made her request for forgiveness as clear and direct as possible. "Please forgive the trespass of your maidservant." Abigail reminded David of the Lord's promise for his life. "The Lord will certainly make for my lord an enduring house." She guided David to look beyond the immediate disturbing circumstances to the more considerable promise of God. Abigail cautioned David not to act in a way that he would come to regret after fulfilling God's word, that this will be no anguish to you, that you will have spilled blood without cause. She advised David to examine the outcome of his current route and how horrible it would be, which was a good move on Abigail's part. And this is perhaps the single best thing that Abigail said. She pleaded with him to release the problem into the hands of the Lord, rather than exacting his own form of retribution. David needed 400 men to accomplish something that God could do as quickly as throwing a stone out of a sling. This reminded David of a time when he really did trust God for victory, when he cast a stone out of a sling and killed Goliath. Through her wise words, Abigail turned David's attention from Nabal back to the Lord. Abigail's appeal to David was so glorious that, because it lifted him up instead of beating him down. Abigail emphasized David's glorious calling, destiny, and overall integrity. She simply asked him to consider whether his actions were in keeping with his future and integrity. 1 Samuel 25, verses 32 to 35. Amplified Bible. David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me this day. And blessed be your discretion and discernment. And blessed be you, who has kept me from bloodshed this day, and from avenging myself by my own hand. Nevertheless, as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has prevented me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, most certainly by the morning light, there would not have been left to Nabal so much as one male." So David accepted what she had brought to him, and said to her, "Go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you and have granted your request." Through her bold, quick, and wise appeal, David was on a sinful course, and Abigail stopped him from sinning. He knew God spoke to him through Abigail, who sent you this day. David is taught a good lesson. Our hurt feelings never justify disobedience. When others sin against us, we may feel explained in sinning against them, but our hurt feelings never justify us. You have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand. David can also thank God because Abigail successfully reminded him of his destiny to reign over Israel in righteousness and integrity. If David had slain Nabal and his household, it would permanently stain David's reputation among the Israelites. They'd always wonder if they could trust him. It could also seal his fate in the eyes of Saul. Because, for the first time, David would have given Saul the legitimate reason to pursue him as a criminal. Blessed is your advice, and blessed are you. It is important to remember that Abigail did not come to David empty-handed. Her appeal was practical, because she paid David what was owed to him. When David received it from Abigail, he acknowledged that Nabal had paid the bill, and nothing was outstanding. Here David knew the blessing of being kept from sin. It indeed is a blessing to be forgiven our sins, but it is an even more incredible blessing to be kept from sin. 1 Samuel 25 verses 36 to 38. When Abigail came to Nabal, and he was holding a feast in his house for the shearers, like the feast of a king, and Nabal's mood was joyous, because he was very drunk, so she told him nothing at all until the morning light. But in the morning, when Nabal was sober, and his wife told him these things, his heart died within him, and he became paralyzed and helpless, like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Nabal lived up to his name. He was a fool. His life was in grave danger. His wife and servants knew it, but he didn't. He eats and drinks as if everything were fine, and he doesn't have a care in the world. In this regard, Nabal represents the sinner who rejects God despite God's impending judgment. David would have killed Nabal, and God will judge the sinner who continues to reject him. Nabal's life could have been saved if he had simply invited David to this magnificent feast. Nabal's greed and folly were his undoings. His heart died within him, and he became like stone. The Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Abigail's wise action saved Nabal and David from himself, but it couldn't save Nabal from God's wrath. Nabal was never out of God's reach, and when the time came, God provided for him. In 1 Samuel 25 verse 33, David was grateful that Abigail's appeal had kept him from avenging myself with my own hand. This proves that David did not need to avenge himself with his own hand. God was more than able to do it. 1 Samuel 25 verses 39 to 44. Amplified Bible. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has pleaded the cause of my reproach, suffered at the hand of Nabal, and has kept his servant from retaliating with evil, for the Lord has returned the wickedness of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, proposing to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David sent us to you to take you to him to be his wife." And she stood and bowed with her face to the ground and said, Behold, your maidservant is ready to be a maid to wash the feet of the servants of my lord. Then Abigail quickly got up and rode on a donkey with 5 of her maidens who attended her, and she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. David had also taken Ahinoam and Jezreel, and they both became his wives. But Saul had given Michal, his younger daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was from Galim. David knew the death of Nabal was God's judgment, which the Lord showed when David decided to let the Lord avenge him instead of avenging himself. David sent and proposed to Abigail. Abigail asked David in 1 Samuel 25 verse 31, Then remember your maidservant. David certainly remembered her here, and he married her. Was this inappropriate? Wasn't David already married to Saul's daughter Michal? The writer of 1 Samuel explains that at this time, David was not married to Michal, because Saul had taken her away and given her to another man to spite David. David will get Michal back in 2 Samuel 3, verses 13 to 16. So Abigail is not David's second wife. She is his second wife first. Note the subsequent relationship lessons she teaches us. Relationship lessons from Abigail. Number 1. Forthright approach. Abigail instantly asked David to forgive Nabal. Number 2. Quick wit. Abigail told David he didn't want a murder on his conscience. Number 3. Eternal perspective. Abigail saw David and their relationship from a divine viewpoint. Number 4. Kind affirmation. Abigail saw David's benefit and gave him encouraging words.